You are watching Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. We continue our march on trying to explore what the second half of this year is going to look like, particularly when many of the countries are coming out of the pandemic. An area or a sector that has been adversely affected by COVID-19, of course, is the airline industry and its subsidiary industries related to it, like hospitality, transportation, and the likes. And while many of us are already reading a lot of reports on airlines closing their shop or at least retrenching their staff or rethinking about how they do their business moving forward, we tend to try to benchmark some of the airlines that are doing that are doing better than most. Because of this, we want to have a chat with Scoot right now, because Scoot is the low-cost arm of Singapore Airlines, and just like most of the news that is coming out of Singapore, they are doing something quite different from the rest of us in this region. So joining us is Campbell Wilson, the CEO of Scoot. Campbell, thanks for taking the time to speak with us. I want to do a quick recap into how Scoot has been faring when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic. Did you have to let go of some people? Are you letting some of them come back? What's the story when it comes to Scoot?
Well, it's very nice to be with you, Ibrahim, and thank you very much for having us. Look, it's been a very unprecedented period for aviation generally and Scoot especially. We're obviously quite affected in the fact that we don't have any domestic market in Singapore. So our recovery has very much been determined by progress on opening borders. But before we've got to this point, we've had to navigate a very challenging period, negotiate with our suppliers of aircraft and other services to reduce costs, to delay the delivery of aircraft, and also, of course, to reduce other costs, including that of staff. So all of our staff have had a pay cut, and we had to reduce the size of the organization pretty significantly during the early period of the pandemic, which was very difficult for all involved. Since then, we've been able to see a progressive recovery as Singapore has relaxed its entry requirements for countries that have managed the pandemic quite well. New Zealand, Australia, and a few others were able to come into Singapore without the need for a quarantine, of course, with a test. And so we've been able to expand our capacity progressively during the past few months. We're up to about 25 out of our previous 68 destinations and about 23% of our pre-COVID capacity. In Malaysia, we've restarted flights to 4 cities, KL, Penang, Ipoh, and Kuching. And we're looking forward to starting Kota Kinabalu once the quarantine capacity in Kota Kinabalu is sufficient to support a resumption of operations. So it's been a very difficult period, but thankfully we've been able to make some forward progress and make a lot of preparations for future recovery when the opportunity allows.
I'm sorry, because it really did bring into attention the kind of concept that Scoot and therefore Singapore Airlines and all the other items that are coming out of Singapore is actually behaving. You're right. There is no domestic market. You have to rely on the region to survive. With the recent news of Singapore announcing that they might not follow the zero transmission model, they will stop counting COVID cases, and they are now working towards living with COVID, just like how we're living with all the other endemics in the region, like dengue or the common flu. This is a stark reminder of how countries are still grappling into what an exit strategy for all these countries look like. How is your business going to be affected by all these different countries approaching different kind of models? And, as we know, they're all kind of looking over their shoulder, looking at each other, seeing whichever works and follow that. So there's a lot of baby steps moving forward, but you're running a for-profit business. I don't know how this is going to be factoring into how you do your job. Is this going to be a big question mark for how Scoot comes back into the region?
So I think there are 2 distinctions to make here. The first is the medium to long term. And I think there's a common denominator in all countries that vaccination is the key to being able to open borders and enable a full recovery of normal life. Singapore has been relatively advanced with respect to its vaccination rollout. And so that is what is certainly leading to the discussions of how we will live with the virus moving forward. But yes, before we get to that point of widespread vaccinations across the region and across the world, there is going to be different paces at which countries decide to open up. And that's really been the case since the advent of the pandemic, that some countries have had a very strict policy with respect to borders. Others have allowed a little bit more latitude. And so as we move forward, I think, although IATA is the industry trade body, they predict a recovery to pre-COVID international travel by around the end of 2023, early 24. Although that's an aggregate global figure, we do expect to see different rates of recovery in different geographies and perhaps in different business models as borders and the way governments calibrate the opening of borders progresses in each place. Clearly, we see a recovery in Europe and in the US domestic market, as well as some other countries where the virus has been well contained or vaccinations have achieved a critical threshold. In Asia, we don't yet see that level of relaxation happening at the moment, and we anticipate that it will take a while yet before we see broadly open borders in Asia.
When we talk about low-cost carriers, at least in Malaysia, there's only one name that comes to mind, which is AirAsia. And of course, you do have Malaysia as your market that you operate in, but of course, you operate in a lot more. To make it a little bit more contextualized towards the local market here, would you see that the business of low-cost carriers are actually facing tremendous challenges moving forward when it comes to the pandemic? Thin margins, very tight usage of the aircraft, high, frequency flights. These are all that is needed in order for a low-cost carrier to succeed. All this is, of course, missing in the pandemic and, of course, the period following after it, whenever that may come. Do you feel that the low-cost carrier business model is actually being challenged right now? How do you keep ahead of building a sustainable business practice moving forward?
Well, in the current pandemic environment, every airline's business model has been challenged. You mentioned some of the prerequisites to a low-cost airline's operation being efficiency and the like. That is true of every airline. We're not designed for this sort of low ability to travel world. But as we move back into more normalcy with respect to the ability of people to travel, I actually expect the low-cost model to be quite robust. I think there's a general consensus that leisure travel will be amongst the segments that recover fastest. People want to see family, they want to see friends, they want to have a change of scenery, they want to experience something new. All of those drivers that have long powered travel. And this region's geography obviously means that air travel is usually the most convenient way in the absence of fast boats or ground-based infrastructure. So I actually think the low-cost market is set for a healthy recovery. We are leisure-focused. We carry a lot of visiting friends and relatives type traffic. We are operating largely within the region, and so people's perception of risk or comfort probably correlates with distance. We offer a low price point, and also we operate at a lower cost so that we don't need to charge the same amount as perhaps another type of airline. So I'm confident in the future, but clearly in the short term, when there are all of these artificial restrictions on people's ability to travel, certainly it's a challenging time to be operating any airline.
Let's talk about aircraft purchases or rejuvenating your fleet. Airlines around the world are constantly trying to make their fleet a little bit younger, and it's no different from both Singapore Airlines as well as Scoot. But I'm sure those plans have been, I wouldn't say halted, but perhaps changed a bit. Would you describe the purchases of new aircraft to be on hold, or you're still pursuing it?
So Scoot always maintained a young fleet. That's partly a virtue of our age. We're a relatively young company. We've been only around since 2011. We had quite an extensive fleet expansion and also renewal program that we had contractually committed to before the pandemic. That included the arrival of both narrow body and wide body aircraft, as well as a new type of aircraft, the Airbus A321, which allows a little bit more range and more capacity, sits somewhere between the existing narrow body and wide body fleet. As part of the SIA group, we had renegotiated the delivery streams of those to stretch out the deliveries a little bit more. But we still anticipate receiving aircraft. Indeed, we continue to receive aircraft as part of the fleet renewal strategy, a cost reduction strategy because these new aircraft are more efficient, and also for sustainability because new technology aircraft obviously are less polluting to the environment. So yes, we do continue to receive aircraft. We will have some excess aircraft for a period of time given the downturn of business, but we do anticipate the recovery allowing us to fully utilize those assets as the time passes.
When I did the interview with Captain Izham, the Group CEO of Malaysia Airlines Berhad, he was projecting that it wouldn't be until 2025 where traffic of the air traffic will return back to normal being 2019 levels. Do you share that same sentiment as well, where it takes up to 3 to 4 years before traffic resumes back to 2019 levels?
So as I say, IATA, the industry body, is forecasting a recovery to 2019 levels by sometime the end of 23-24. I think that's about right, although there will be some differences based on geography or business model. And I think time will only tell whether our region and our business models are at the forward end of that curve or the latter end. One thing we've learned over the past 18 months is that forecasting the future is even more difficult than we thought it was pre-pandemic.
Okay. And another issue is, of course, the sectors surrounding air travel. When I prefaced the show, I was talking not just about the airline industry, it was also the retail industry, the transportation industry, the hospitality industry. All of them are intertwined. And there seems to be some bargain purchases right now by particularly active investors trying to enter this space. And some of them are actually already recording profits because prices are rock bottom. They're trying to buy in. So there, I wouldn't call it a very weird situation, but amidst all this woes, there are some interesting opportunities for businesses and sectors to rejuvenate themselves. Where does Scoot fit in all these kind of recovery stories of all these addendum sectors towards the airline industry? Do you see yourself participating, trying to help out the hotel business, the vacationers, and so on?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we are part of the whole tourism and travel ecosystem. The suppliers to our business, whether they be airframe manufacturers or maintenance organizations or caterers or ground handlers, clearly rely on our operations for their income. Correspondingly, our passengers feed the tourism and retail sectors of the places that they travel to. And of course, our employees spend money both at home and abroad. So I think the fact that we are operating at less than normal capacity clearly is having an impact on all of these sectors, and our recovery will in turn benefit those sectors. But I think it's important to note that it's not just our current situation is not a consequence of customers not wanting to travel or losing their desire for traveling in future. It is an artificial situation whereby people are prevented from being able to travel either by government restriction or requirements on arrival or departure. And so to the extent that other industries might have recovered, it's because they're not facing these same externally imposed constraints that the travel and tourism industry is operating under. And to be clear, we understand the need for these constraints. Public health is clearly the most important consideration at this juncture. But as for our recovery being of a different pace than other less impacted sectors, I think there's logical reasons why that's the case.
Yeah, through no fault of their own, customers don't want to travel because of these restrictions, but there's also that element of the individual themselves might not want to travel because of the fears, either found or unfounded, on traveling. I'm sorry, I'm speaking about myself actually, because while I'm sure that things are okay, that your planes are clean, that the airport is well, ventilated, that I have taken my 2 doses of my vaccine, I still don't want to travel, not yet at least, that wait and see kind of approach. Do you think that there's a lot of people like me that is afraid to travel? Or are you going to bank on people that are okay to travel and serve them first and then let people like me, with a little bit of hesitant travelers, to come in later? How do you approach that kind of psycho dynamics of different travelers out there?
Clearly different people are going to make different assessments of risk and their willingness to travel at this juncture. What we've seen in our own experience, as well as the experience of other countries overseas, is that when the restrictions on travel and or the vaccination rate reaches a certain level, people's trepidation to travel quickly disappears. We can see that in the US, in Europe, in Australia before their recent resurgence, travel demand, particularly leisure travel demand, increased dramatically, in some cases nearly to the pre-COVID, or in some cases actually beyond the pre-COVID level. So yes, there's going to be some initial hesitancy, totally understand that, but I think the recovery will itself generate more confidence and comfort, and then in turn encourage more people to travel. In terms of the effect on our business, it does mean that our capacity restoration will be progressive. It's not going to be a binary all off and then immediately all on scenario. We are progressively adding back our capacity. At the moment, we've added back about 23% of our pre-COVID amount with 25 of 68 destinations. And it will be progressively continued until the point at which we reach the pre-COVID volumes. According to IATA, that's sometime 2023-24, and it will be a stepwise increase between now and that point.
Sorry, did you say 23%, 25% right now of recovery?
Correct. So on a capacity basis, 23% of what we were pre-COVID. On a destination count, we're 25 out of previously 68 destinations.
I've spoken to a few airlines prior to this interview. They are not at that level yet. So this is a remarkable story to be told. I know 23% looks small, but compared to your peers, surely that is something of a remarkable feat, don't you think?
Well, I mean, we all are facing slightly different circumstances. In our case, there are a few things that are helping support the recovery of our business. One is the particular destinations that we're operating to. We have quite a significant presence back in China, for example, and there's a lot of traffic that is traveling between Singapore and China, which is supporting those flights. We also have a very sizable cargo operation, particularly in the belly hold of our wide-body jets, and that is contributing significantly to the operating cost of these flights. And then Singapore itself remains open for transit travel from many countries. And so there's, even if there might not be point-to-point demand between, for example, Singapore and Malaysia, there is connecting demand across the network, and Scoot is participating together with Singapore Airlines in operating a SIA group network that is allowing traffic to funnel through Singapore.
Do you know, prior to the pandemic, 2019 levels and before, what would be the kind of split of travelers between leisure travelers versus business travelers, if you don't mind sharing?
So Scoot is principally a leisure airline, and obviously we don't have a business class of the likes of the Singapore Airlines. So it's a little bit difficult for us to tell the actual motivation of travelers. Anecdotally, we felt it was around the 10 to 15% level, principally small to medium enterprise type travelers. But the vast majority of our customers were what you would consider leisure, vacationers, visiting friends and family.
So that's what I'm getting at. Do you envision Scoot, or at least low-cost carriers, trying to entice a little bit more business travelers moving forward, if ever they ever come back in the next 1 or 2 years? Do you feel that business traveling per se might have taken a serious hit, and perhaps those who travel for work might have to rethink into why they're traveling in the first place? Is there a rethinking process right now happening amongst the business travelers of the world?
I suspect you're probably right. Clearly, we've all got used to being able to interface electronically even more than we were before. Interviews such like this are done over Zoom. But I do think there's
still love to have you in the studio, however, Campbell. I mean, nothing beats face-to-face, but yes, I understand the rethinking process that is currently happening, Sorry to interrupt.
And I think that's clearly the point, that whilst we've all become used to electronic interaction and we can keep things ticking along with it, nothing does beat face-to-face. And I think there will be a recovery in face-to-face. The rate at which that happens, I think, is anyone's guess. But I do believe there will be a recovery in business travel. It might just not be the same trajectory as leisure. As for our efforts to entice the business traveller, we've always been open to carrying business travellers. We have a premium cabin in our wide-body jets called Scoot Plus, which is akin to a sort of premium economy type proposition on a full-service carrier. We participate in the Singapore Airlines Group frequent flyer program, including the status mileage that accrues to people's tier status. So we've always accommodated business travel. I think it's more the case that as recovery of travel itself progresses, the traveller may choose to travel on a low-cost airline because of cost constraints, or because maybe the networks operated by the full-service carriers have shrunk a little bit as a consequence of the disruption caused by the pandemic.
Okay. Campbell, we'll go for a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about the sustainability business of Scoot. Thanks for staying on with us. I have with me Campbell Wilson, the CEO of Scoot, the low-cost arm of Singapore Airlines. Campbell, the pandemic has brought to attention the kind of ESG practices that a lot of businesses are doing. The airline industry has always been under focus because of the carbon emissions that is being created by this industry. And a lot of countries have made pledges to make their economy low carbon or zero carbon, net neutral. Do you feel that you have a role to play in achieving these kind of objectives?
Absolutely, we have a role to play. You've rightly noticed that aviation is an inherently emitting industry. And it's clearly the sustainability, whether it be environmental or societal or government, is a key concern of investors, of travelling public, and of course of our staff as well. So yes, sustainability, notwithstanding the disruption caused by the pandemic, remains an underlying thread. Maintaining a young and efficient fleet is part of the solution, and so Scoot does maintain a young fleet, including the arrival of new aircraft which are more efficient and pollute less than their predecessors. Things like the commitment to be carbon net zero by 2050 that has been made by the Singapore Airlines Group, including Scoot. It includes the adoption of things as small as the packaging that we use for in-flight meals and the reduction of single-use plastics, through to technological advances that may not actually have been conceptualized yet to make aircraft engines more efficient and to provide fuel in a more sustainable way. It's clearly something that is important and clearly a commitment that we are making to ensure that we are playing our part in the sustainability of the industry.
And for those travelers that are currently watching this interview right now, looking at us speak, what would be some of the kind of messages that you want to reach out to them?
I think clearly we are confident in the future of the industry, as challenging as it might appear at this particular point in time. We're very fortunate that, being based in Singapore, we are part of an ecosystem that recognizes the importance of the aviation hub. It recognizes the importance of international travel and borders that facilitate that. And we have the financial support for us to be able to invest in the future, not just in terms of aircraft and sustainability, but in terms of the customer experience. Earlier on in the pandemic, we were one of the first airlines in the world to be refunding people in cash rather than credit. As time has gone on, we've introduced many systems to enable a more touchless experience and to assure people of their health and safety when they travel, which has led to us being the first low-cost airline in the world to be awarded the Diamond Health and Safety rating by Apex. And we'll continue to do so because we are very confident in the resumption of travel and just the re-emergence of all of the drivers that led to tourism and travel being such an important industry, particularly for local economies. And so we're very much looking forward to getting back and operating and contributing in a more normal way to the usual flow of people and ideas and business around the world.
Campbell, while I don't doubt the resumption of travel will happen. I am, however, pessimistic about the kind of timeline that you guys share. But I do hope you guys, and pray all the best to you guys. But in the meantime, do you have the kind of, does Scoot have all the necessary capital to keep on going until travel resumes back to normal, or would there be even further cost-cutting measures that is going to be implemented either by Scoot or by SIA Group?
So the SIA Group has raised around 21 billion Singapore dollars during the course of the pandemic, and Scoot is very much a strategically important part of the Singapore Airlines Group. So to answer your first question, yes, we have significant liquidity, and we're focusing on the recovery, not the immediate survival. That said, we have taken some very significant measures, deferring fleet to manage capital expenditure, reducing costs by virtue of all the supplier agreements, and sadly to reduce the size of the business, including headcount, and imposing things such as salary reductions, so that we are maintaining an efficient cost structure in order to be able to navigate this period.
Fantastic. All right. Campbell, I do wish you and the family at Scoot all the best. That was Campbell Wilson, the CEO of Scoot. If you've missed any part of this interview, just head on to astroawani.com. Look for either Scoot or Campbell Wilson on that website. Until then, thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.